Cognizance that the National Assembly has not delegated its powers to enact legislation for domestication of international treaties and agreements as prescribed under Section 12 of the 1999 Constitution to either the President of the Federal Republic or to the Nigerian Immigration Service or to any other agency or official of the executive arm of government, observes that the Presidential Executive Directive and the Nigerian Immigration Service that all Africans could come to Nigeria without visa requires compliance with Section 12 of the 1999 Constitution. Worried that the national security of Nigeria in the context of the current insurgency and terrorist challenges of Boko Haram could be jeopardized if the said proposed 2020 visa on arrival policy of the NIS.
Mr. President, I support this need for domestication, but Mr. President, I want to raise this very critical point before we begin to debate on what may not be at issue. There are two clear things here. There is visa on arrival, and Mr. President, there is free visa. What Mr. President said recently that I know is free visa for Africans to enter Nigeria. Mr. President, visa on arrival is a policy that has been employed by the Nigerian Immigration Service since 2012. And that means that if for whatever reason you are unable to get visa from your country of origin, you can fill the necessary forms and get to the airport or port of entry and get your visa. And so clearly, Mr. President, what we are debating here is free entry visa for Africans as announced by Mr. President. And again, I think as part of the African Free Trade Arrangement, it needs an act of the National Assembly to back it up. I think we should take steps to do that.
That all that needs to be done in terms of legislation should be done before implementing this very, very commendable policy. This is part of what is happening, globally. It's what is in vogue, particularly countries that want to open their doors to investors and tourists. Saudi Arabia is beginning to operate this kind of policy. We've seen Dubai. Dubai has been, having this kind of policy, and you see how tourists go into Dubai. So several countries, it's what's in vogue now. It's what is in vogue. So while looking at the security angle, we should also remind ourselves that it's important we go in line with what is happening globally. Other countries are doing it, and they are gaining a lot in terms of business influence to those countries. Also, tourist influence to those countries. So we should look at this perspective as well. St. Thomas has emphasized that. So that's what I want to emphasize. It's a commendable policy. We should embrace it while making sure that all legislations that will allow that to be put in place should be, done.
Section 3 made categorization of the kind of treaties, and the category 1 is what is referred to as law-making treaties, and these are defined to be being agreements constituting rules which govern interstate relationship and cooperation in any area of endeavor, and which have the effect of altering or modifying existing legislation or which affect the legislative powers of the National Assembly. The nature of the treaty that the subject matter of the motion is a lawmaking treatise, and by subsection 2, paragraph A state that paragraph A of section 1 of the section need to be enacted into law. So it's a mandatory requirement that treaty of such nature should be enacted into law.
Policy be domesticated. In fact, Mr. President, my colleagues, a lot of Nigerians were really worried. The reason for the worry was because of the spate of insecurity in Nigeria. And for us having known that part of the insecurity came from elements coming outside and into Nigeria, to now have a visa policy that doesn't seem to be properly regulated was giving a lot of people a lot of jitters, because what it now meant was that anybody could just come in and actually cause mayhem in Nigeria, not knowing this. So we really want to support distinguished Senator Adetumbi in this particular motion, that we domesticate it so that the do's and don'ts and cross the I's and dot the I's and cross the T's in how you can come into Nigeria. I know that Nigeria is the big brother of Africa. But sometimes, if you try to be big brother when you don't have anything left, you may just find yourself with nothing. And we want to make sure that we take care of our citizens before we start taking care of the whole of Africa.
We have a policy that allow us or allow other internationals to come into this country, get visa on arrival. So we more necessary, as National Assembly saddle with that responsibility, legislate on that before it is implemented. Otherwise, so I don't think it is any problem. He made a policy statement. It is now incumbent on him, as Mr. President, to also direct the necessary authorities. Let them bring the Immigration Act here for us to amend. When we amend it, we will now be able to input properly what we need to do and how that policy will be carried out. So for me, it's a policy meeting within the African head of state, and he feels that let us relax a little bit. It must and have to be legislated. And so I think his motion is in order, and that Mr. President should be urged to quickly send in the amendment to the Immigration Act so that we'll properly take the necessary action on it.
Clearly, Mr. President, since we have signed the AFTA, which I think was signed eventually towards the tail end of maybe June or July, I think the next thing to do is to domesticate it. But in that domestication, if the law-making body, as represented by the National Assembly, both the Senate and the Rep, if they do not look into the law itself, given vent to the presidential approval that has been given for visa on arrival, then all of us as a nation will be just open to what I call anybody just coming into this nation. Of course, this what we signed guarantees the free movement of persons. But in doing that, we, the lawmakers, must be given the opportunity to look into it and try to fine-tune gray areas. Because without doing it, there's nothing wrong with Mr. President going out there and saying something on behalf of all of us. But clearly, before it is perfected, the National Assembly should play its part, particularly those treaties that require legislation. So, Mr. President, without belittling this issue, I want to strongly support that we quickly ask the executive to bring a bill so that we can actually support the initiative that they are trying to put in place. This will aid trade, it will aid commerce, it will aid our economy, and by extension, Nigeria will be further developed. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Buhari.